really benefit them in this awesome industry.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do this morning is interview Mr. Andrew Snorton. Welcome to Inspirational Talk with Dr. Tangi. Can they see you?
Yeah, I think so. Let me slide over just a little bit further. I think here we go. I think we're in good shape, so thank you.
So tell us about you. Give us a brief synopsis about Mr. Andrew Snorton.
Okay, a brief synopsis is I was born in the great state of Illinois, grew up in the great state of New Jersey. For college, I attended Wake Forest University up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the youngest of two. So I have to say happy belated birthday to my sister who celebrated her 49th. Ooh, I'm sorry. But she celebrated her birthday yesterday. I did reach out to her. So even though I didn't post on social media, I sent her a nice video yesterday. So happy birthday to my sister. Hopefully he's listening in Delaware. I'll have to say very blessed having, great family, great parents, teachers, coaches, people who got me exposed to not only through athletics, music, academics, things of that nature. As our other guest mentioned, Mr. Dennis, member of fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, so initiated back in the spring of 1991, so I celebrated 25 years, and have been blessed to be a part of our grad chapters in Duluth, as well as Loganville Conyers. Currently, some of the multiple hats I wear: a small business owner with Creative Community Solutions LLC, so we do some education-based services, as well as press and media services for small businesses and community organizations. So I have to give a thank you to the Lawrenceville chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, as I helped do a lot of their press and media for their recent event this past Saturday. Outside of that, on the nonprofit end, with the LEAD Foundation, we do year-round programming ranging from male mentoring, co-ed leadership development, scholarship programs, college tours, summer camps, and we launched a new initiative, the Literacy Project, that we're doing in multiple cities. And on the university end, through my affiliation with having previously served as our president of the Association of Wake Forest University Black Alumni from 2011 to 2015, as well as Alumni Council. Currently, the only advisory piece I'm doing with the university, so please, if Wake Forest is listening in, which I know they are, these are the only things I'm doing. I'm on the board for the School of Divinity, which I just was recently appointed in July of 2016, so that'll be 3 years that I'll do that. The Deacon Club, which helps provide formal support for our student athletes. And one of the things I'm really proud of is if you look at the information out there, especially the recent report done by the University of Pennsylvania about 2 to 3 years ago, I'm very proud that when they aggregate the data and you look at your Power 5, Power 6 conferences, the black male athlete graduation rate at Wake Forest is in the top 10 in the country. So that's on par with some other schools like Notre Dame, Boston College, Duke University. That's one thing we're very proud of with that 4-year graduation rate. The only other things I'm doing with the university right now, unless you're gonna send something in the mail, is alumni and admissions. So we actually have the opportunity to go ahead and work alongside with the high schools, with the college fairs, workshops, things along those lines. And Greek Alumni Advisory Board, which is in its infancy, but it encompasses members of Greek letter organizations across the board, not only because the makeup of Wake's campus is where almost half of the students are members of a Greek letter organization, but more importantly, when we talk about things like stewardship, outreach, and our theme for today, mentoring, and not only that, what are alumni doing within community or within corporate or things along those lines? It's something that lets people know that this is an example of how it can be more of a stewardship and outreach tool. So, like I said, great to be here.
Well, thank you so much. I know you have a wealth of information to share with us today, and so we're going to try to narrow it down. We're going to try. But I think that one of the things that is very important, at least for right now, is that LEAD Foundation.
Yes.
That, to me, can be life-altering for a lot of kids, and you just really never know how many people it impacts, because when you impact one person, you really impact people in their circle. And I'd like for you to tell our listeners, why did you decide to start the LEAD Foundation, and what is the mission and vision of that organization?
Surely. Well, the LEAD Foundation, we actually got established around 2007. I have to give credit to our executive director, Mr. Michael Woodward, as well as Tabia Woodward and other colleagues who've worked with us, Willie Cartwright, Evan Crawford, and there's countless other people. But it really started with myself and Michael Woodward, and it all started with a phone conversation, and we wanted to do something different than what we were doing at the time. I was teaching at Pitneyville Middle School, and he was teaching at Norcross High School. And yes, we were doing programs under the context of the classroom, but we were like, we need to do something else. We need to do something different, because both of us are products of mentoring programs from where he grew up in the Miami West Palm Beach area, and before I grew up in Monmouth County. And ironically, the mentoring program that I was involved in high school was actually done by one of the local chapters of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. So yes, there are multiple organizations doing great work, but we just decided, why don't we just do this on our own and see what happens? So the first piece was our Alpha Leadership Program, which is co-ed for middle and high school men and women. And that's always done during the spring semester. And we do pieces like financial literacy, post-high school planning, public speaking. Just, we know the skill sets that students are going to need in and outside the classroom, in the business setting, and what have you. But what we were finding is we were having more female students than male students. So we're like, what can we do differently? So we intentionally did the Real Project, which is our male mentoring piece, and we start that right after Labor Day, and we continue through December. And we pretty much meet once every 2 weeks. We pretty much Saturday programming, so once every 2 Saturdays. And the goal was, by having the men in the fall, it would be a better bridge for having more in the spring. And even during this current state, when we're looking at issues talking about what's going on with local elections, even this past Saturday session, we were looking at media labeling, because, for example, last time I checked up in Chicago, there are an estimated 5 million people that congregated for the Chicago Cubs celebrating. But unless somebody shot somebody, anything that's done under that umbrella of celebration is acceptable. Yet when we did a comparison of, let's say, a couple thousand people protesting in front of a police station, all of a sudden, even the students were like, oh, that's negative. There's the perception of someone doing something illegal, someone doing drugs, someone being violent, things along those lines. I'm like, but wait a minute. If there are larger numbers, wouldn't that mean there's a higher potential for something to happen? Oh no, they were celebrating. But we had to really dissect and break that down and look at the fact of whether it's labeling, whether it's demographics, and then we made it personal in regards to, okay guys, when you've been standing outside waiting on your ride for going home from a movie or going home from a mall, how often has security approached you? And now they're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because it might be 2 or 3 of us, but there could be an audience of 10 or 15 that are loud and cutting a fool, lack of a better term, and nothing happens. So when we're looking at these critical issues, and we're looking at it through the lenses, especially of how it impacts men of color, whether African American, Spanish speaking, what have you, now all of a sudden they're seeing things a little bit differently. And it's more about not to beat body upside the head and say these are all these negatives out there. It's like, be aware of these things, and how do you counter these things? How do you counter that narrative that people of a certain background are only doing certain things? Because unfortunately, sometimes students are labeled. Even one of the examples we gave was where if we saw someone walking down the street, what does that mean? Some would say, oh, they're up to no good. But I'm like, well, what if they're walking home from work because that's their only way to go? What if they're walking to a friend's house? We don't know the story. So even looking at some of those types of items and how it kind of, if anything, especially for our young men, realizing that, number one, they're not the only young man dealing with an issue, whether it's false perception, or it could be a family issue, it could be a health issue, it could be anything. I can look back a couple years ago when we were doing one of our workshops, and pretty much what we do with our young men when we get them there, they have their downtime. We have our Real Talk, which is our open forum. Whatever they need to get out their chest, they can go ahead and do it. Then we go to our core workshop, and then after our core workshop, it's split between either study time, so they can keep up with their classes, or they'll do their time to go ahead and design their own service projects. So even last year, they did a drive to serve the homeless, collecting coats, jackets, socks, all these things that we think this is an adult thing. No, we had 7th, 8th, and 9th graders taking the lead on that, and they've done these types of things the last couple of years. But I remember one particular session that really struck me, where things were kind of going far left and far right, and we just stopped it, and we just asked a simple question. And we asked, how many of you have not seen your male parent in about a year, and about 2/3 of the room raised their hand. And that really hit home because it took me back to knowing how active my father was and still is. And we'll talk about this later, how he's still one of my mentors. Uncles, other men that were present. Then we asked another question, how many of you had said it had been longer than that? And there are two examples that really hit home, which really reinforces the fact that if you have a want and willingness and a talent and have an ability and have something you can bring to the table, anyone is capable of mentoring. But there are two young men that really stood out. One said he hadn't seen his father in 5 years because his father was incarcerated. Another, and I kid you not, noted that his dad only lived about 15 minutes away, but the only time he'd see his dad was during basketball season. So I'm like, let me get this straight. Your dad lives 15 minutes away, and you might see him maybe 2-3 months out the year. He's like, yeah. I'm like, what happens the other nine months? He's like, no, just is what it is. And that really hit home because when we think about issues with young men or men in general, ultimately it's going to come down to some type of hurt, some type of pain, some type of anger, some type of resentment. And that can be lack of connectivity with a male figure, lack of connectivity in other areas. So with, trying to bring it all back in, just looking at the real project under the umbrella of the Lead Foundation, anyone first has to identify, based on what you know, based on the resources that are available, what is the most consistent model you can do with sitting down, talking with. And yet, talking over the phone is great, using technology is great, but we all of us in here know there's nothing like one-on-one or nothing like personal interaction. So if the best model you can come up with is once a month or once a week or once every 2 weeks or what have you, do it to the best of your ability and do it as consistently as possible. And you never know what impact it makes. If anything, they know at least this time is safe haven. At least this time someone's going to talk with and listen to me. Even if they don't agree with me, just I want to be heard. That is so huge. And as you were alluding to before about some of the effects, even now, there's young men that we're able to work with in middle school and high school. They're now either in college or they've graduated. One time I was up in Chicago and one of our former students was up there. Was like, hey, let's meet for breakfast. And there's a young man who went through our programs in middle school, high school, graduated from Boston University. I think he's still out in California, but I think he's going to be in New York now or whatnot. But when you see different instances like that, it lets you know that you don't have to be the most famous person or the most well-spoken. If you have a want and willingness to help people, and this is one thing, and one thing I'll always remember as I'm kind of going back and forth. I remember when I was recognized for an award in 2011. I'll just be blunt. I was going through some life issues, all right? I was going through divorce. I'm going to be blunt. I was going through divorce. And I remember getting the award, and I'll always remember what I said. I was like, people think that things have to be perfect or ideal with you professionally and personally. But I'm here to tell you right now that's not the case. And in fact, when things aren't going great with you professionally or personally, one of the best ways to channel that energy is to devote it into other people, because then when you see the challenges that other people are living with and they would willingly want to trade places with you in your mess, not only are you helping provide a means as to how to handle life challenges, but it gives you something that we all can use, and it's called perspective. And when you have that, and you have empathy for people, you think back to, people that took time out. They didn't have to take time out of their schedules. They could have focused on, my job, or in some cases my family or what have you. This isn't my problem. But they thought enough of you. So now one of the best ways you can thank those people for taking time and use it. Take time for somebody else to the best of your ability, based on what you know, and as consistently as possible. And as you continue to grow and develop and learn more, and we're all work in progress. I'm an expert based on where I am right now. I still have further to go. But bottom line is, based on what you know, based on what you can share, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. So now you're giving somebody more tools in the toolbox. And like I said, if once a month is the best you can do, if once a week, once every 2 weeks or what have you, once you've identified what's the best and most consistent you can do at this time, you do it. Because you never know what seeds you're planting. You never know. It might not be the breakthrough with you, but someone else circles back, and that second and third and fourth time they hear those same themes and the same messages, whether it's through the lens of nonprofit or how we're both going to talk through the lens of our respective fraternal organizations, it's going to resonate at some point in time.
Absolutely. I totally agree